Good day everyone. So the topic that we will be discussing is about the structure of mitochondria relates to their function and cellular respiration. So before we proceed to the main topic, let's first answer the question, what is mitochondria? The mitochondria, known as the powerhouse of the cell, produces ATP through cellular respiration. Its unique structures such as membranes, cristae, and matrix are specially designed to carry out each step of this process efficiently. So, the further explanation, the mitochondria, also known as powerhouse of the cell, is an organelle inside our cell that produces energy. Just like how power plant supplies electricity to a city, the mitochondria supplies energy to our cells. This energy is the form of a molecule called ATP, or adenosine triphosphate, which acts like the battery that powers many of our body's activities, from muscles movement to brain function. So, what makes mitochondria special is its unique structure. It has an outer membrane that protects it, an inner membrane that holds into structure called cristae, and a space inside called the matrix. Each of these parts has a very important role in producing ATP. The membranes and the membranes and folds increase the surface area, making the process of cellular respiration more efficient, while the matrix contains the enzymes needed to break down nutrients into energy. In short, mitochondria are designed perfectly for their job, turning the food we eat into usable energy so that our body function every single day. Let's proceed now to the structure, the outer membrane. The outer membrane has a smooth layer that covers the outside of the mitochondria. It acts like a protective barrier, controls what enters and leaves the mitochondrion, such as oxygen, glucose, and waste products. The role of this cellular and the role of this in cellular respiration is it lets oxygen and pyruvate and that needed for ATP production and allows ATP and waste to exist. For further explanation, the outer membrane of the mitochondria is like its protective coat. Its its structure is smooth and it fully covers the outside of the organelle. Its function is to act as a protective barrier but not a solid wall. Instead, it works like a gatekeeper that controls what go in mitochondria. Import, Important materials like oxygen and glucose can enter because they are needed to produce energy, while waste products are allowed to leave so they don't build up inside. In relation to cellular respiration, the outer membrane is important because it allows the entry of pyruvate, or the broken down form of glucose, and oxygen, both of which are necessary for ATP production. At the same time, it lets the newly made ATP and other waste products exit in mitochondria, so the cell can use the energy without the outer membrane working properly. The mitochondria would not get the raw materials it needed to make energy, and the cell would not function well.
An inner membrane is a circular barrier, most notably the inner mitochondrial membrane, which forms a folded structure called cristae, contains protein complexes, the circular respiration, and regulates the passage of ion and molecules. It also features some of bacteria, which is called the inner membrane bacteria, where it's called the inner membrane or cytoplasmic membrane, and it's responsible for energy production and protein secretion. The the functions of the inner mitochondrial membrane is essential for circular respiration, particularly
Cristae. Cristae are the folds of the inner mitochondrial membrane that extends into the matrix. Their folded structure increases the surface area, giving more space for enzymes and proteins needed in cellular respiration. The cristae contain the electron transport chain and ATP synthase. which are responsible for making most of the cell's ATP. The space is inside the folds help build the proton gradient that drives ATP production. Cells with higher energy needs, like muscle cells, usually have mitochondria with more densely packed cristae, showing how their structure adapts to energy demand.
The intermembrane space is the region between the inner and outer membranes of mitochondria and chloroplast. Its structures and composition are crucial for organelle function. It is found between the inner and outer membranes in both mitochondria and chloroplast. The structures of intermembrane space. Porins. The outer membrane contains porins, which are channel-forming proteins that allow free diffusion of ions and small molecules into the intermembrane space. The inner membrane proteins. The inner membrane is highly selective and contains proteins involved in electron transport chain. It is essential for oxidative phosphorylation in mitochondria. ATP synthase. It produced ATP using the proton gradient. Transport proteins. It regulates the movement of specific molecules. Cristae. The inner mitochondrial membrane is folded into cristae, increasing the surface area for the ATC and ATP synthesis. Thylakoids. In chloroplast, the intermembrane space is between the inner and outer membrane, while the thylakoid lumen is a separate compartment within the thylakoid membranes. Functions of intermembrane space. Proton gradient. In mitochondria, the IMS acts as a reservoir for protons pumped by the ETC, creating an electrochemical gradient used by ATP synthase to produce ATP. Intermediate compartment. It serves as a temporary holding area for molecules moving between the cytosol and the mitochondrial matrix or chloroplast stroma. Protein trafficking. It involved the import and sorting of proteins destined for the inner membrane or matrix stroma. Apoptosis regulation. In mitochondria, the IMS contains proteins like cytochrome that when released into the cytosol, it triggers apoptosis.
Matrix. The mitochondrial matrix is the fluid-filled space inside the inner membrane. It contains enzymes, ribosomes, and mitochondrial DNA. Its main functions is to carry out the Krebs cycle, where pyruvate is broken down to release energy-rich rich molecules like NADH and FADH. These molecules then supply electrons to the electron transport chain. The matrix is the essential in cellular respiration because it provides the starting point for energy production that later leads to ATP formation. Explain. The matrix is the inner space of the mitochondria, where its important reactions happens like Krebs cycle. It produce molecules that provide energy for making ATP, which the cell.
Mitochondrial DNA. The mitochondrial DNA is a circular DNA found in the mitochondrial matrix. It contains the genetic instructions needed to make some of the proteins and enzymes used in cellular respiration. By carrying its own DNA, the mitochondrion can produce key points that help in Krebs cycle and electron transport chain. So the Mitochondrial DNA is a small circular DNA that can be found in a mitochondrial matrix. Unlike the DNA in the nucleus, this DNA is unique because it is inherited only from the mother and is independent of nuclear DNA. Its main role is to store genetic instructions needed to produce certain proteins and enzymes that are essential for cellular respiration, the process where cells convert nutrients into usable energy. What makes mitochondrial DNA very important is that it allows the mitochondrion to make some of its own proteins, especially those used in the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain. These two processes are responsible for producing the majority of the cell's ATP, which is the main energy source that powers many cellular activities. In short, mitochondrial DNA acts as the blueprint that enables the mitochondria to function as a powerhouse of the cell, ensuring that energy production happens efficiently. Mitochondrial ribosomes are Mitochondrial ribosomes are small structures floating in the matrix. They are used the instructions for mitochondrial DNA to build proteins. These proteins include enzymes that play important roles in cellular respiration, making sure that mitochondrion can efficiently produce energy for the cell. Mitochondrial ribosomes are tiny structures that float freely in the mitochondrial matrix. Their main role is to read the genetic instructions from the mitochondrial DNA and use these instructions to make proteins. The proteins they produce are not just ordinary proteins, they include special enzymes that are very important in cellular respiration, which is the process of producing energy. Without these ribosomes, the mitochondria would not be able to create the necessary enzymes for the Krebs cycles and the electron transport chain. This mean this means that the cell would struggle to produce enough ATP, the main energy currency of the cell. So in short, mitochondrial ribosomes act like protein factor- factories inside the mitochondria, making sure that the cell has enough enzymes to create energy efficiently. So, amoy ni ang hitsura ng mitochondria. So, ang outer membrane acts as a productive covering and controls what enters and leaves the mitochondrion. The inner membrane folded into structures called cristae, which increase the surface area for energy production. Um, cra- DNA, the mitochondria have their own DNA, which allows them to produce some of their own proteins and enzymes. ATP synthase particles found in the inner membrane. These structures are responsible for making ATP molecules, the energy currency of the cell matrix. The fluid filled space inside the mitochondria that contains enzymes, ribosomes, and DNA. This is where the Krebs cycle takes place. Intermembrane space. This area between the outer and inner membranes where hydrogen ions build up, essential for ATP production. Cristae. The folds where the electron transport chain happens, producing most of the cell's ATP. Ribosome. Small structures that make proteins needed by the mitochondrion. Granules store ions and help regulate conditions inside the mitochondria.